interesting range of experiences on this stage today. And our subject is American fashion on the cusp of change, equally representative. All of these people here are representative of this cusp. But I thought I'd ask Bethann right off the top to actually see what she thinks the cusp of change is, what she thinks this change that we are experiencing is.
Well, for me, it's interesting because I'm getting to see, I grew up in the garment district as a kid, and that was one of my first jobs. I worked in it for many years. And what recently happened to me is seeing and discovering some designers who were actually doing something a little different than the system. The system that we always knew as a fashion designers or fashion apparel manufacturers had seemed to change a bit, that they were finding another way to get through the system. In other words, they weren't going to be bought by a luxury brand. They didn't have a godfather who comes in and just gives them money and says, go do your thing, like we used to have back in the day. They were doing something a little different. It was just interesting to me that some of them were boys, men. I call everybody a boy. I'm older. Young men of color. That was interesting to me, too, because oftentimes people say, where is the black designer? Or, and that really annoys me because they exist. You may not be famous, you may not have the biggest business at this point, but the point of it is they exist and they're doing things a little different, and they're being faced with things that would make them have to do it a little different.
Well, I wanted to start with Kirby because, as Imran said, he just won the CFDA Fashion Fund, which means you're kind of emblematic of this change in the industry. What's your take on it? I mean, what is that taken to happen? What have you done, do you think, to make that difference?
All of a sudden, everyone wants me to go first. I had this conversation the other day. I did my last interview for a while the other day, and I kind of let it all out. One of the things that we talked about is this these two industries. It's like this parallel industry that exists from the fashion industry that you may know, right? Like I told you earlier that I was going through your pictures, and at the same time there was a parallel industry happening where, the American designers might have been Donna Karan, Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, but then there was a black fashion industry that was happening, and that consisted of Carl Kanai, Cross Colors, Fubu, Rocawear, Mesquite, all of these, and what it was is we weren't represented on one side, and we kind of created our own lane somewhere else. So we had a place to be recognized and a place to be seen and a place to be heard, but for whatever reason it just never crossed. And I think what's happening now is that we haven't changed how we design and how we communicate, or we've just now starting to be accepted. And like this white establishment is now starting to understand that there's this whole other thing that existed and thrived without them. Cross Colors in the 90s was a $280 million a year business. Fubu was $500 million a year business, but for whatever reason wasn't in vogue, wasn't in glamour, but it was in Word Up and Source and all these different things, and now you got these worlds that are crossing. And you have people in the white establishment who try to label it, or try to box it in, call it streetwear, call it whatever the fuck they want to call it, but it's not, it doesn't have to be labeled. It's just, now it's just all merging in. We were the diffusion of the fashion industry for a long time, and now we're mainstream.
What do you think has brought about that change in attitude, though?
I think, the other day I sat at this really pathetic conference, or whatever the fuck it was. It was supposed to be like this diversity and inclusion thing. And everybody's well-meaning. I think everybody means well. I think, I don't doubt the intention, but I but there was a few things that were said in the room, and a few people in here were in that room, and it was like, activism is good for business. More than anything, it's good for business. You know, inclusion is really good for business. Look at the bottom line. And this person had a chart, and he was like, look at the bottom line. The numbers have gone up. We've included black people, and now the numbers have gone up. And I'm like, what the fuck is this bullshit? This is the dumbest shit I've ever seen in my life. And so I got up and I walked out. That was my first time walking out. Me and Bethann talked about walking out of shit earlier. I walk out of stuff all the time. This was the first time. This was the first time that when I was included in that conversation. But this is, you know, unfortunately, I felt like I had to walk out because there was too many, and it was just too many people commiserating about things that didn't apply to them or mislabeling, and it just seemed really pathetic, and it seems like for some people it's altruistic because they have black people around them and they have people of color around them, the LGBT communities around them, disabled people, whatever, all these different other types of people around them that don't fit the original mold, and they feel like they should be included there. Like they feel like, hey, I'm friends with LaQuan. I want LaQuan to come to this party with me. I want him to enjoy this thing with me. So you have those altruistic people who are trying to include us, but then you have other people who think that activism, inclusion, diversity, and all this shit that we're talking about now is a trend. It's not a trend. It's not a trend. It's more than anything, it's the right thing to do. I don't understand why industry that's so influential was so late. I can't speak to shit that happened before I was born, but I can just say that you know, I'm happy that it's happening. I question everything, though. I do question. I'm cognizant of my place and where I'm being used and how people are placing me in these rooms and why I'm being asked to speak and why I'm being asked to talk about race versus my story and all these different things. I'm cognizant of all of that, but at the same time, that I understand that there's a responsibility for me to do it, even though it's uncomfortable, because it's part of me leaving the door open after I leave.
Oh, I want to jump on something. I want to say
I
something
wanted you
to
to.
everybody. Thank you. To talk about what he's mentioned when he mentioned the urban brands. The urban brands was something that came along because they were reflecting its society at the time, the community, which was hip-hop, rap. That infused our garment district at the time in America. It added to the revenue. They were talking to their audience. What I'm impressed with right now, with this young man too, is that they're speaking to their audience. So the difference is not so much of what they have to do or where they come from or how it is, it's just the time. It's time for it. So they're reflecting their community. They're talking to their audience. They're not trying to talk to, quote unquote, no disrespect to any publication of Vogue, say, for instance. They're not expressing themselves in that way. They're expressing themselves in a need that they have a call for, and that makes a difference.
Now,
That's
Kirby's.
That's huge. I mean, the idea that
You have nothing to say.
that's
about
what makes I admire both of you for that they truly are talking to their audience, and that's a change in fashion, because I've been doing this forever, 30 some odd years, and there has been where gender and color was used as advertising, and I was a part of that, right? So and you see that, and that is, you know, what you're bringing up, that you use it for the bottom line, but then there's no one in the executive suite that is a person of color or all the genders are represented. And I think that's a big change that I think all three of our companies are doing differently, is that we are speaking directly to an audience that we understand and who we are.
But when Bethann and I were talking last night, I'm just curious about the shit that happened before Kirby was born. Yeah. We were talking about a time when the diversity issue wasn't an issue because it just was.
Yeah.
It just seemed, oddly enough, that there was a moment in fashion where things were a lot more diverse.
And surely you had designers who were of color. They recognized, the media recognized them and called them the black designers, because it was something that was happening for the first time in an industry. There were people like Scott Barry and John Haggins,
Patrick Kelly.
Stephen Burrows. No, before Patrick Kelly.
Willie Smith?
I'm
Willie
the elder.
Smith?
I'm the elder.
Oh.
All right. Willie Smith, Stephen Burrows, did I say? You know, they cut me off. Yeah, then Patrick Kelly came a little after, true that. So there was a time that the black fashion model was existing. You know, there were girls who were on the runways, because then it was the difference between runway and print. So the white girls mostly did print. A lot of white girls also did, you know, runway, but there were two different divisions. So the runway models was a division where they helped support the designers in the industry. So you always saw them, you know, and that's why when we went to Versailles, 45 years today, 45 years today, Versailles, Battle of Versailles. You may not know what I'm talking about, but Google. The fact of it is that, thank you.
And see the movie.
And see in the movies. And then HBO is coming up too. But the fact of it is right now that you saw that time that the girls went to Paris to aid the Versailles benefit at that time. There were a lot of girls of color, and that would influence Givenchy and many of the designers that were there from the French side. So we've had diversity along, but then it disappeared. And why did it disappear? We can blame one house of fashion, and we can also blame some people who came from another country who basically were casting directors. We never had casting directors before. Casting directors changed everything. And that was when, all of a sudden, you didn't see even maybe a Linda Evangelista in a fashion show, because that was too glamorous for a certain designer.
I think, I mean, that stayed so strongly with me from experiencing fashion in that time and seeing how it became, I guess, literally whitewashed. But I think what's really interesting now when I look at designers like LaQuan and Kirby is that I've seen them referred to as polymaths, which really interests me, that the approach is a multifocal approach, you know, that when they're looking at fashion, there's so many other elements included in just the act of design.
What is polymath?
It's when you do more than one thing, you know, and I think your show, Kirby, for example, your last show was a great example of that. The levels that you could approach that show from.
Oh, you mean like...
Yeah,
like
the location, the inspiration, the graphic element, you know, the narrative is so strong. And that's really what fashion seems to be so hungry for now.
No, that's content. You all are just looking, pardon you all, I don't mean you all, because you know you're my boy. But what I'm saying,
Thank you.
that's just people looking for, you know, content. You're creating because you need to make sense of something. This is just clothing designing, and people just being inspired. They're inspired. I mean, I looked at the show of LaQuan, and I was very happy. I saw his very first show. You know, how old are you now?
I just turned 30 in August.
Okay. First show was when? What age?
21.
Okay. First show. He goes out there, and he's got fancy people there supporting him. I don't even know who the guy is, but I'm sitting there looking. All right, first show, second show I seen. I didn't see any of his shows until this last season. And it was impressive to me for many different reasons, because he too was speaking to his audience. But it was how he used certain things, like, you know, this one on the charmeuse slip dress was the print of mugshots of women who were, you know, actually in prison. And that right then was very important to me. So we're talking about controversial things and community things and social conscious things, right? In addition to making design. That's what inspires him. He saw that. The things that inspired Kirby is a similar thing to me too. He's speaking from a reference. So when fashion and the editors, they all have to come up with something because they've got something to write. Even when I had to come and look at their shows, I had to think of things, how I perceived it. But it's looking for content. To me, it's just making clothes. But it's also speaking to an audience. But it's speaking to people they know. They're leading a charge to me. They're sort of like speaking to an audience that says, yeah, I feel that. It's not meant for everyone to feel, but other people get behind it because it becomes like a moment in time.
But LaQuan, again, we were talking last night, and talking about the way your business is growing. And it seems to be growing very successfully, but you have a great custom audience. But you want to expand the way designers expand. They expand through wholesale. There are people like Doug Stevens, who spoke brilliantly here last year, and I think is here this year as well, who would say that wholesale is not the future, that this notion of personalization is the way forward, which you are doing very, very successfully already. Is there something about this change, this cusp of change, that isn't just what you're doing, but how you're doing it?
I think so. You know, in my opinion, everything that I have done from the very beginning has been unconventional. You know, it hasn't been the proper formula to how to be successful in fashion. At least from, you know, if a young kid wants to be a designer, what are they going to do? They're going to Google. Google's going to tell you what kind of schools to go to, just the proper steps. And I tackled those things, and I did not succeed. So what happens when you're a young kid from Jamaica, Queens, and you don't have the money or the resources to go to the fancy schools that you want to go to, or to even have the connections to be able to say, you know, I want to manufacture my clothing line. Where are you going to get the money from? You know, who's going to really help you? So I think from all of the lack of resources that I had, I just did from what's within. You know, I think that my entire success has been from a spiritual journey. You know, I believe that, you know, I have a natural gift, a natural talent to construct and to create, and also to make women beautiful, make women look beautiful. And the way that I did that was very unconventional. I started out with a custom business, but before I even had a business, I was walking around New York City giving women leggings that I just was inspired by. And so when you would see me in the club, or you would see me in New York, it was like, oh, that's the leggings boy. You know what I mean? But I was way more advanced, and I was way more than just creating leggings, but I didn't have the platform and the opportunity to really showcase a full collection. And so with all that being said, it was all of these different hurdles that I had to sort of overcome, and all of these different things that I had to figure out. How can I create a business? How can I really get a business going? How can I get, you know, editors and buyers to come and see my collections? And with that being said, everything that I have done has really just been from the ground up. When I talk about self-financing, when I'm talking about models, these are my friends, my girlfriends. I'm saying, hey, can you do me solid favors? And it's just the organic nature of people genuinely loving what I'm creating that allowed me to become successeful, if that makes any sense.
Well, I can't believe it. We just hit zero there. So
I have to say one thing.
I'm going to ask you one last. All right, you go first.
Okay, mine might be too long.
You what?
Okay, let me try. You know the reason, okay, so I'll do it real fast. The reason why I wanted to say something too about Patrick is because as I speak about them, each one of them speaking to their audience, Patrick, who has the most experience in the industry, which is interesting to me, he's done it all like the regular, within the system, quote unquote. And then sometimes you get to a point in your life where, whether Kirby or LaQuan gets to that point too, where there's nobody else listening, nobody's talking to you. You no longer have a business. You no longer have that position that you had at that particular job, and you have to start from zero again. And I think what's interesting to me with someone like Patrick, that he actually is speaking to an audience too. And the audience is really people, like I asked them, Patrick doesn't have to do a collection every season. He's speaking and
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. So the point of it really is that he's doing something in a sustainable way, but he's doing it in a way that it speaks to a lifestyle. And that's become really great because it becomes from the e-commerce position, and that's interesting. And that's why I wanted to be able to speak on that, because I think that everyone doesn't need to wear lots of labels anymore. Some people like just basics. And I think that's what I love about what he's done, and I love what LaQuan does, and I love what Kirby does too, because all of them are doing something that speaks to my soul from the 60s and the 70s.
Well, because I come to my business from values, just like everyone else is coming.
Exactly.
We're bringing our values, and we bring, my values are, I care about, after running big companies and being creative in big companies, I looked at Gap, and I never spoke about this, but after leaving Gap, I saw the pollution that we did. I saw I looked around in the executive suite, and I didn't see myself.
Yeah.
Right? So when I went and started my business, it was about, I want people of color, I want different genders, I have more women work for me than men. I didn't fix it that way. I just wanted a company that has shared my values, and we do things responsibly because I care now.
Yeah.
So all of that is the same thing that we're all doing. We were talking about this earlier, don't label me as a black designer. I'm black, but I'm also a designer.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Kirby and LaQuan as well. One last comment. Cusp of change. Change is change. It's kind of neutral, neither positive nor negative. How are you feeling about this notion of change? Inspired? Kirby?
Easy, baby.
Don't give him the walk off.
Yeah. I'm like the live wire, huh? Change as it pertains to what? The industry or to like my
American
status?
fashion on the cusp of change. Positive?
I think American fashion, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I think we're leading as far as like change. We're the only ones having these conversations. I'm in Paris, I'm in Milan, I'm in Germany, I'm in Tokyo. We're the only ones having this conversation.
Well said.
And, this that's happening here happens every day. No matter how bad that conference was that I went to the other day in New York, we're having them. You know what I mean? Like there's an active community of established people and unestablished people who are at least trying to speak to each other. And I think no matter what the past was with the old guard, whether that be like Stephen Kolb, Anna Wintour, or whatever, I know now that from being in rooms with them that they are actively trying to learn. And that's something that I think is unique to American fashion. So I love and hate my industry, but I wouldn't do it any other place than in New York.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.